So this is a quote that I got from the Sixth Carbon Budget Report, and I pulled it out because I thought it really encapsulated the need to put people at the heart of the transition to net zero. If we think it's all about technology, we're going to fail, not just because we're ignoring the massive contribution that people can play, but also because we're losing the opportunity to take them on this journey with us, to harness their enthusiasm, and to make sure that the path is underpinned by fairness and consensus. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is one of the key charts from our report, which sets out the actions that we need to take to meet the Sixth Carbon Budget trajectory on the path to net zero. And just a quick reminder of the key headline message from our report was that emissions need to reduce by 78% by 2035. And that's a big step up from our previous target, which essentially has been pushed forward by 15 years. The chart shows what's needed to get to net zero across 4 different areas. And starting from the top, the first thing you need to do is to reduce demand for the most carbon intensive activities. Instead of driving, you can walk or cycle, you can cut meat consumption, and you can fly a bit less. Energy efficiency is also really important, not just for buildings, but for car efficiency and resource efficiency across the economy as a whole. And that gets you the first 2 blocks of this chart. But the biggest single thing that gets you there is electrification, and that's shown in the orange wedge. We need electric vehicles in place of internal combustion vehicles, heat pumps instead of gas boilers. We also need other forms of low carbon energy that isn't electricity, so hydrogen and bioenergy with CCS can play part of this story. The third block is about decarbonising the electricity we have today, which, although is over 50% low carbon, we need to fully decarbonise by around 2035. And the last wedge you can see there in green is around carbon storage solutions. And these are a mixture of nature-based solutions such as afforestation and engineered greenhouse gas removal such as direct air capture. So this really gives you a flavour of the role of individuals in that transition, but the next chart quantifies this a little bit further. Next chart, please. So Nick mentioned a little bit about the importance of behaviour change in our Sixth Carbon Budget, and this really sort of sets that story out. The purple slice of this pie chart, which represents about 40% of abatement, we think can be delivered by low carbon technologies or fuels, and but without moving behaviour towards any other technologies. So this tends to be things that people don't notice directly. They can carry on using much the same equipment and technology as before, but the rest of it, around 60%, involves some element of change to behaviour. The orange wedge is pure behaviour change, or where the majority of that abatement is around behaviour change, such as a change in diets. And the rest of it, the pink wedge, is where people are bringing together technology and behaviour to cut emissions. So this is things like plugging in your car rather than filling it up at the petrol station. And it's clear that we need to engage people really closely with these changes we're setting out, and to start a conversation with them on how they perceive these changes and how best we can deliver those. So for surface transport overall in our balanced pathway, emissions need to reduce by about 70% by 2035 on 1990 levels and reach nearly zero emissions by 2050. And what's striking about this chart is that we need much more people engagement than in the economy as a whole. Nearly 95% of emissions reduction rely solely on people changing the way they do things, compared with the 60% that we've just seen. And the next few slides unpick these elements a bit further. The next slide, please. So this shows our ambition for demand reduction for cars, which requires a 17% reduction in miles driven by 2050 relative to business as usual. We looked at evidence on 3 drivers of this. One was societal changes and changes in technology that might stimulate behaviour change. So this is things like increased home working, the use of technology and IT, and continued trends in internet shopping and e-commerce. And this element of demand reduction targets mainly commuting and business trips and builds on evidence from what we found under COVID. And it's really important, as Nick pointed out, to lock in these positive behaviours that we've seen going forward. The second element is moving from cars to more sustainable transport modes like walking, cycling and use of public transport. And while walking trips have increased in recent years, cycling have been relatively flat and bus trips have declined. So we really need to address this. In our pathway, we have an 8% of reduction in car miles coming from this shift, but actually it represents a much bigger fraction of trips, about 27%, because the shorter trips are the easier ones to switch. And the third element here is about increasing car occupancy, so increasing efficiency of how we use our car, in effect. And this can be achieved through things like car and ride sharing, which we've started to see happen through the various apps now available, and increasing car club schemes. And all of these require significant changes in people's behaviour compared to what we see now. So next slide, please, Rachel. And similarly for the van and HGV sector, we looked at how demand here could be reduced. For vans, we focus on the parcel delivery sector because that's where there's more evidence on the potential to do things a little bit differently. And here we've highlighted things like e-cargo bikes for last mile deliveries, the use of urban consolidation centres, telematics for directing to precise delivery locations. And we think that can deliver around a 3% reduction in van miles by 2030. For HGVs, we based our analysis on a study that Cambridge University did for us a few years ago. And they looked at measures such as improved routing through telematics, increased loading, reduced empty running, as well as industry collaboration through consolidation centres. And we think we can achieve around an 8% reduction in vehicle freight demand by 2050. Now, you might say, why focus on demand reduction where everything's going to be decarbonised anyway? But, we've identified important benefits of this, for example, for health, air quality, noise, and just making the environment and better places to live and work in. Okay, Rachel. The final element of behaviour change that I wanted to tell you about in surface transport, probably quite obvious, is the take-up of zero-emission vehicles, which is shown in this chart for cars and HGVs. And this requires drivers to get used to the new technology and overcoming things like range and charging anxiety. So perhaps not as drastic as the changes that we've just mentioned, but changes that people need to get used to nevertheless. And this needs to happen really quickly. Electric vehicles have been a long time in the making, but even now they just represent about 5% of all new car sales. And this needs to rise to 100% by 2032 in our balanced pathway. So that rapid transition over the next few years needs to reach out not just to the innovators and early adopters, but to mass market. And the zero carbon market for heavy goods vehicles is well behind that of cars. And there are three main options currently on trials around the world. These cover hydrogen, battery electric with ultra-fast chargers, and battery electric with catenary system. And our balanced pathway has a mix of these. And what we've recommended in our report is that we have large-scale demonstrations in the next few years to identify which of those options works best in the UK context. And then they'll start to be taken up in the late 2020s, reaching nearly 100% of sales by 2040.